Cooper on the Case, a Masonic Authors Guild International production.
Freemasonry and the 40 Prime Ministers. Hello and welcome to this episode of Cooper on the Case, where I examine statements made by various authors about Freemasonry to test their accuracy and validity. In the last episode I discussed the importance and use of footnotes or endnotes, and the third podcast of Cooper on the Case was to have had a look at another few footnotes in a well-known popular book about Freemasonry. But then someone asked me a question that sent me down a different rabbit hole. The question I was asked was, quote, "Is it true that all English Prime Ministers for the last 200 years were Freemasons?" Close quote. The fact that she probably meant British Prime Ministers, Scotland and England were united by the Union of Parliaments in 1707, is by the by. We do get inquiries such as this at Magi, but we are not geared up to be a query answering service, and normally we would suggest contacting the relevant Grand Lodge. But this question caught my attention, and as it was from a personal friend, Cooper was back on the case. Where on earth had that claim come from? The inquirer explained that she had recently come across a booklet with the title The Templar Legacy and Masonic Inheritance within Rosslyn Chapel by Tim Wallace Murphy. There was no date of publication. I found a used copy available online, so I purchased it to add to the ever-growing pile of books needed to continue Magi's mission. As an aside, that's another reason why subscribing to Magi on Patreon would be of great assistance. My copy also had no date of publication, but I do know that it was being sold in the Rosslyn Chapel gift shop at least 20 years ago, if not earlier. The National Library of Scotland suggests that it was possibly published in 1994. I found the reason for the inquiry on page 31 of that booklet. Quote, "Membership of that controversial and secret order in all its forms, that is Freemasonry, has been an indispensable key to high office. For instance, every Prime Minister in England, from Walpole in the 18th century to Ramsay MacDonald in the 20th century, was a Grand Master of the Freemasons." Close quote. The Walpole in question was Robert Walpole, 1st Earl of Oxford, 1676 to 1745. He was Prime Minister of Britain between 1725 and 1742. The MacDonald named by the author was James Ramsay MacDonald, 1866 to 1937, who served as Prime Minister in 1924 and then again from 1929 to 1931. Where then did Wallace Murphy get this information? Here is the first problem. There are no footnotes or endnotes citing sources, and nowhere in the booklet is supporting evidence for that statement provided by the author. I suppose this is as good an example as any as to why a writer needs to cite sources if he or she wishes to be taken seriously. Let us take the time to examine the statement that all Prime Ministers were Freemasons and Grand Masters to boot. If true, that would mean from 1725 to 1931, that is, for 206 consecutive years, Britain's top politician was a Freemason. There were exactly 40 Prime Ministers during those 206 years, and I'm not going to name them all here. But could it be possible that this claim is even remotely true? Because there are no sources given, I had to look elsewhere. Firstly, I turned to the pocket history of Freemasonry, which contains extensive lists of notable men who were Freemasons. Under the category Statesmen, I find not a single British Prime Minister listed, although there are numerous monarchs and princes of Britain and other countries. Next, I turned to that good solid standby, although not without its faults, Coyle's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, with the same negative result. Where next to look then? From my own memory, I had a nagging feeling that there had been a Scot who was Prime Minister of Britain and who was a Freemason. Having looked at my notes, I can now confirm that Andrew Bonar Law was Prime Minister in 1922 to 1923 and a member of the Conservative Party. He was initiated into Freemasonry in the Brighton and Glasgow Shamrock and Thistle Lodge number 275 on the 31st of August 1900. He was succeeded as Prime Minister by another Scot, J. Ramsay MacDonald, of the Labour Party, as previously mentioned, but there is no trace of him ever having been made a Freemason. I then checked the official publications of the Grand Lodge of England, Ireland and Scotland and their websites, where each supply a list of previous Grand Masters, and none name any Prime Minister between 1725 and 1931 as being a Freemason, let alone as a Grand Master. These Grand Lodges all fail to mention that there was a Prime Minister who has been confirmed as being a Freemason, Andrew Bonar Law. Why he's omitted from the various lists I cannot imagine, although I have an idea why. This investigation raised another question in my mind. Why did Wallace Murphy cease to list Prime Ministers of Britain in 1931 by ending with J. Ramsay MacDonald? This is especially curious when one is aware that Sir Winston Churchill, 1874 to 1965, was a Freemason and was Prime Minister 1940 to 1945 and again from 1951 to 1955. Exactly what the motive was for the late Tim Wallace Murphy to make such a grossly inaccurate claim about Freemasons who were alleged to be British Prime Ministers, we shall probably never know. This investigation was the result of an innocent inquiry about a statement that, quote, all Prime Ministers of England from 1725 to 1931 were Freemasons, close quote, and led to an interesting conclusion, but we have no way of explaining why such an inaccurate statement was made. To make matters worse, that booklet continued to be sold to the public for many years. However, the story does not end there, as the author goes on to make other claims that are worthy of further investigation. Wait for another episode of Cooper on the Case. By the way, I haven't stopped looking for that case of whiskey. It's just that I have spent more time on this case than that case. Please don't swamp Magi with queries, please.
Cooper on the Case. This podcast is for educational purposes and perhaps entertainment. While the Masonic Authors Guild International provides the most accurate information possible, listeners use the information at their own risk. This podcast and its contents are Magi's properties, as are all the opinions and information it presents. Robert L. D. Cooper, Mark A. Tabberson, any other speakers' views and opinions within the podcast do not represent nor speak for Freemasonry, any Masonic organization, their former or current employers in any way, shape, or form. Magi, Cooper, or Tabbert will not compensate you in any way whatsoever if you happen to ever suffer an inconvenience due to the information herein contained.